Most people think silence means weakness. But the truth is far more uncomfortable than that. Human behavior reacts to silence in a completely different way than most people realize. In a world where everyone is desperately trying to be noticed, the person who remains emotionally controlled immediately becomes different. And people notice difference. Not always consciously, but psychologically. Silence creates tension, because when people cannot fully understand you, they begin trying to read you. And the human mind becomes deeply obsessed with emotional uncertainty. Think about it carefully. Loud people reveal themselves very quickly. Their emotions become visible. Their insecurities become visible. Their intentions become visible. But emotionally calm people create distance between what they feel and what they reveal. And that distance creates psychological presence. Most people are constantly reacting to life without realizing it. Reacting to opinions, reacting to rejection, reacting to retention, reacting to attention, reacting to discomfort, reacting to silence itself. But the rarest people are the ones who can remain emotionally still while everyone around them loses control. And strangely, those people often become the most respected person in the room, because confidence is not always loud. Sometimes confidence is simply emotional stability under pressure. Human beings naturally study what they cannot predict. That is why silence changes social dynamics so powerfully. When someone talks too much, people stop observing them carefully. The mystery disappears. The tension disappears. Emotional predictability removes psychological weight, but silence forces observation. People begin paying attention to your expressions, your body language, your reactions, your pauses, your emotional control. And the less emotional validation you seek from others, the more powerful your presence starts to feel. Most people do not even realize how much of their behavior is driven by emotional reassurance. They want approval, attention, confirmation, acceptance. They want to feel important. They want to feel understood. And because of that, they constantly reveal themselves emotionally without even noticing it. But silence interrupts that pattern. Silence creates space. And emotional space makes people uncomfortable, especially insecure people. In fact, one of the fastest ways to expose emotional instability is silence. Because emotionally dependent people struggle to sit inside uncertainty. They immediately try to fill the silence. They over-explain themselves. They seek reassurance. They become nervous. They laugh unnecessarily. They speak impulsively. And without realizing it, they reveal their emotional state completely. Calm people are different. Calm people are different. Calm people understand something that most people never learn. Not every emotion deserves a reaction. Not every situation requires explanation. Not every silence needs to be filled. And that level of emotional discipline changes how people perceive you. Because human beings naturally associate emotional stability with strength, even when they do not consciously realize it. Have you ever noticed how emotionally reactive people slowly lose social control during conversations? The more emotional someone becomes, the more predictable they become. Anger becomes predictable. Desperation becomes predictable. Insecurity becomes predictable. Neediness becomes predictable. But calmness creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates psychological weight. That is why silence often feels intimidating. Not because silence is aggressive, but because silence removes emotional information. And when people lose emotional information, they begin projecting their own fears into the empty space. That is why quiet people are often misunderstood. People assume silence means arrogance, or sadness, or judgment, but usually silence simply means observation. And observation is powerful, because the person observing the emotional environment usually understands the room better than the people emotionally reacting inside it. Most social situations are emotional exchanges beneath the surface. People are constantly searching for signals, approval, validation, attention, respect, dominance, attraction, reassurance. Human behavior is deeply emotional even when people pretend to be logical. And silence interrupts emotional expectations. That is why emotionally controlled people often seem mysterious without even trying. They reveal less. They react less. They emotionally chase less. And psychologically, people become more interested in what feels emotionally unavailable. Scarcity creates value inside the human mind. Attention loses value when it becomes constant, but emotional restraint creates tension. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression on others. Usually they are not the loudest people. They are not the people desperately trying to dominate every conversation. The people who leave the deepest impression are often emotionally grounded, present, observant, controlled. Because real confidence does not constantly announce itself. Real confidence stays calm, and calmness has become extremely rare in a world addicted to emotional stimulation. Social media has trained people to react constantly. Constant opinions, constant validation, constant exposure, constant emotional performance. Everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants attention. Everyone wants reassurance from strangers. But emotionally powerful people slowly become less dependent on external validation, and that independence changes their entire presence. Because the moment someone no longer desperately needs approval, they become psychologically difficult to manipulate. Manipulators survive through emotional reactions. They provoke emotions. They study insecurities. They search for weakness through reaction. But emotionally controlled people become difficult to read, difficult to pressure, difficult to emotionally control. And that creates silent power. In fact, silence is one of the strongest psychological tools in human interaction. Silence forces reflection. Silence creates tension. Silence creates tension. Silence changes power dynamics, and most people are deeply uncomfortable with it. Because silence forces people to confront themselves. Most people use noise to escape themselves. Constant talking, constant scrolling, constant distraction, constant emotional stimulation. But silence removes distraction. And in silence, emotional truth becomes visible. Fear becomes visible. Loneliness becomes visible. Insecurity becomes visible. Emotional dependency becomes visible. That is why many people cannot sit alone quietly for very long. Because silence amplifies internal emotion, but emotionally mature people learn to coexist with silence instead of escaping it. They do not panic inside emotional tension. They do not need constant reassurance. They do not emotionally collapse every time uncertainty appears. And because of that, their presence feels different. Stable people create emotional safety. Reactive people create emotional chaos. And human beings naturally trust stability more than emotional unpredictability. Even inside relationships, emotional control changes everything. The person who emotionally depends the most usually loses psychological balance first, because dependence creates fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of silence, fear of distance, fear of emotional uncertainty, and fear changes behavior. Human beings become emotionally irrational when they fear losing emotional certainty. That is why emotionally detached people often appear more attractive psychologically, not because they care less, but because they remain emotionally centered. They do not collapse under emotional pressure. And emotional stability naturally creates respect. Silence also changes attraction itself, because the human brain becomes curious about what it cannot fully access emotionally. Mystery activates attention. Emotional unpredictability activates curiosity. And curiosity keeps people emotionally engaged. That is why oversharing weakens emotional impact. When everything becomes emotionally available immediately, tension disappears. But restraint creates psychological gravity. Silence creates gravity. Presence creates gravity. Emotional control creates gravity. And people feel that energy even when nobody says anything. Human beings constantly communicate emotionally without words. Through eye contact, through posture, through timing, through reactions, through stillness. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is psychologically the strongest person there, because emotional discipline is rare. Most people are controlled by emotion without realizing it. Their mood controls their behavior. Their insecurity controls their reactions. Their fear controls their decisions. But emotional mastery changes human behavior completely, because when someone controls their emotions, they stop allowing the external world to control their internal state. And that level of calm becomes powerful. Not loud, not dramatic, just powerful. There is another uncomfortable truth about silence that most people ignore. silence reveals emotional dependence extremely fast. People who cannot tolerate silence often cannot tolerate themselves. They need constant stimulation because stillness forces self-awareness, and self-awareness is uncomfortable for people who spend their lives escaping their own emotions. That is why some people constantly seek noise. Television, social media, attention, relationships, notifications, conversation, distraction after distraction, because silence removes emotional escape routes. And when the noise disappears, unresolved emotion becomes impossible to ignore. The human mind suddenly becomes louder than the outside world, and many people are terrified of that experience. But emotionally strong people slowly build comfort inside silence. They learn how to observe emotion without immediately reacting to it. They understand that emotions are temporary experiences, not commands that must be obeyed instantly. And this creates psychological strength that most people never develop. The ability to remain calm while emotionally overwhelmed people react impulsively is one of the rarest forms of power in modern society, because modern society rewards reaction, fast opinions, fast anger, fast validation, fast emotional performance. But true emotional control requires slowness, awareness, observation, patience. And patience itself has become psychologically intimidating in a world addicted to instant stimulation. Notice how emotionally calm people often change the energy of a room without speaking very much. Their emotional stability affects the emotional state of other people, because emotions spread socially. Panic spreads, anger spreads, anxiety spreads, but calmness also spreads, and people unconsciously feel safer around emotionally grounded individuals. Even powerful leaders understand this instinctively. During moments of pressure, people naturally search for the calmest person in the environment, because calmness signals control. And control signals safety. This is why emotional discipline quietly creates authority without demanding it. Loud people try to force presence. Calm people naturally create presence. There is a major difference between attention and respect. Attention is easy to get. Emotional reactions create attention constantly. But respect is different. Respect usually grows around emotional consistency, around emotional discipline, around calmness under pressure, around the ability to remain psychologically centered while everyone else reacts emotionally. And this is one of the reasons silence becomes powerful. Silence forces people to interpret you through behavior instead of performance, through energy instead of words, through emotional stability instead of emotional display. In the end, silence is not emptiness. Silence is information. Silence reveals insecurity. Silence reveals emotional neediness. Silence reveals fear. Silence reveals emotional strength. And the people who truly understand silence often understand human behavior better than everyone else. Because the person reacting emotionally usually loses psychological control first. And in human behavior, control creates presence, not noise.